Today's guest, Jeff Aguy, is one of the most visionary people that I've ever met. He has an incredible wealth of knowledge and experience, both in his educational background, his business career, and his time really being a prominent leader in the activism space here in the Minneapolis and St. Paul community. And Jeff and I really connect on the idea that we need to cast a vision that isn't just thinking about the next quarter or the next year, but is really pushing humans to think about what's possible for themselves. And Jeff is doing that through 2043 and his 2043 vision, as well as several other projects that we'll dive into, which are really centered around both casting vision and then implementing that vision in a way that creates more equitable opportunities for all members of our communities. And Jeff does a really good job of not only talking about that, talking about those opportunities, Web3, technology, community building, but also living it and really making a tangible impact in the lives of every community that he interacts with.
So today we have Jeff Aguy on the podcast. Jeff is, one of the visionary leaders here in Minneapolis and St. Paul that I've followed and respected for a long time. So really dope to sit down and have a conversation with you and just talk more a little bit about your vision, for yourself and for your companies and for, the city that we both are really invested in. So Jeff, really appreciate you being here today.
No, I appreciate it. Well, you're one of the people who I follow a lot as well, you and Teo, and just some of the content that you've been putting out and really not just redefining what Web3 will be, but how it will shift culture, how it will shift technology and just in many ways, our opportunity to lead differently. And so,
100%.
Super excited to be on here and looking forward to what the conversation will be all about.
So first thing, I did creep on your LinkedIn a little bit, and I noticed that you have the title Economic Futurist on there, which is really dope. I actually have a degree in finance, and I love economics, more from just like my own interest standpoint, but also getting into Web3 and kind of economic models in that space. But I'd love to hear from you. What does an economic futurist do? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Ever since I was a little kid, I grew up in the church, so I would almost see the future before it happens, and folks would call that prophecy or something like that. And really, my graduate degree is in creativity and innovation, and so kind of really getting a better understanding of what futurism is, and it's really I think an innate ability to look at patterns and determine what the future could be. And I think the term economic futurism comes from our unique opportunity to create an economy that's much different than it is today. So the name of my company is 2043, and it really signifies that by that time, I think that we can create an economy that works for everyone. I like to tell people that I love America, and the America that everyone has an opportunity to pursue happiness. The America where all people are created equally but are treated equally. And so economic futurism is really the belief that we can design an economy both at an ecosystem level and at an individual level that's vastly different than what it is today. And that's why I'm really excited about the work that you do really well in Web3 and really thinking about how that's going to fundamentally change how we see the future and how we interact with one another.
Well, I noticed, and I first of all appreciate that and really respect the work that you do as well. But I've noticed recently with a lot of the events and stuff that you're hosting, you do have a really strong focus on emerging technology. Web3 is coming up. You seem to be really pushing people towards, emerging tech specifically. Why is that? What is, exciting you about AR, VR, Web3, all these buzzwords that are being thrown around?
Yeah, I think, it's a unique opportunity for me. Like, my whole life's work is at the intersection of inclusion, the economy, and technology. That's what my whole life has been about. And I've seen, for people who look like me in the past, the kind of fields that we've gone into. We've gone into a lot of helping fields, whether that's psychology or social work or teaching, in fields that are really important. And this pandemic taught us that those fields are actually very essential, but it's not treated as so. And so in terms of, when I look at emerging technology, I think it's an opportunity for the early adopters to really define how the future will work. And I think the later you adopt, I look at TikTok, for example. I'm one of those people who didn't make a TikTok early on. Terrible mistake, right? And you see how TikTok is not just dancing videos. There's TikTok for authors. There's TikTok for almost everything that you could think of. And it's an entire community and how you could leverage that platform to move forward. But so many of us just kind of tossed it to the side as, oh, this is something that the kids are doing. And so when you look at emerging technology, I think not only is it going to be how we work, but it's going to be the foundation of society. I think in the future, we'll have meetings in the metaverse, and even not just the future, but right now. But I think it's just going to be such a commonplace, and to have as many people understand and engage with what the future will look like, I think we'll have more voices, and more voices mean it's more equitable.
Yeah, to go off that last point, when I think about Web3 and emerging technology, I mean, my thing is that it's only going to reflect the humans that design it, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about voices and equity. How important is it for you that Web3, AR, VR, all these things that you're talking about being the foundation of how this next version of society develops? How important is it for you to make sure that the people designing it, are diverse?
I think it's super important. I think one of the really, kind of terrible examples that you could think of, I'm not sure if you saw that, the sensor to dispense soap is like kind of used around a lot in equity circles when you do trainings and things like that, where, the person put their hand under the soap and it didn't identify them because of their skin tone. And the designers of the sensor, there was a certain, frequency, or not even frequency, but there's a certain tone that the scanner doesn't even pick up. So you really couldn't even wash your hands. Like, it's as simple as that. Like, but imagine that on a wide scale in society. Also, when you go on Google and you Google, let's say you Google something that's quite simple, like fun, you'll see, a bunch of people who might not look like me having a good time. But when you, Google black people, I'm sure they've made some changes to their algorithm, but you'll see like all these negative stereotypes because, again, the technology is only as diverse as the people who design it. And so what that will mean for the future, because when you look at Web3 and the blockchain foundation of Web3, or how Web3 is designed, or even when you look at some that's very popular, like, the metaverse, right? If that's the place where we're going to be doing business, and it's designed by a certain group of people, then it locks out an entire group. And I think now it's, you think about gentrification now, right? Or some of those challenges about gentrification. Well, folks are already buying real estate in the metaverse. And so it's just, you know what I mean? So a lot of the issues that we have in society now will just become magnified. So I think it's an opportunity to solve some of those challenges. But if we don't, I think it's to our detriment, because those problems will just be exponentially worse. And also, when you look at over the next 20 years, I think space exploration becomes a very real thing. So going to Mars, I was watching, actually reading an article with Elon Musk yesterday, and he was saying how his goal is to make traveling to Mars as affordable as possible. And for him, affordability is $100,000. And when you look at that and think about, well, if we're going to have potentially humans living on Mars, then how are we going to interact with the humans on Earth, or how are we going to interact with one another? Right. I think technology is a great equalizer, but also it can be something that if you're left behind, then it's just moving too fast for you to catch up. So it's important for us to be early adopters, and that's for everyone, right? When I say equity, I'm not just speaking to a particular race. I'm also speaking to women. I'm speaking to the international community. I think in the past we were defined by our nationalities. Yeah, we were defined by our individual cultures, but I think in the future we'll be defined by our values. Yeah. And so I might have shared values with someone that looks vastly different than me, and guess what? We get to decide how we look like. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, as well. So the whole concept of, humanity as one race, I think you'll start seeing a lot more of that in the metaverse, and also as we continue to explore what Web3 looks like more and more.
Well, and it makes for a better experience for everyone, right? Yeah. Like if you can identify with someone based on shared values and create a culture that's based on diversity, based on different perspectives being valued, right? That ultimately is better for you too.
Yeah, I mean, you think about like McKinsey's report on diversity, equity, and inclusion and profitability. You know, when they first started, you know, a few years back, I think might have been 2015 was their first report, and what it showed was that companies that are racially and ethnically diverse at their leadership level perform 35% better than their counterparts. Companies and organizations that are racially and ethnically diverse actually perform 43% better than their counterparts. So, you know, when we're talking about equity and inclusion, we're not just speaking from a moral right standpoint, because that's been the truth and it has been forever. But I think it's to our benefit from a profitability standpoint, from a business standpoint, from a societal standpoint, from a human experience standpoint. That the more voices that you have, the more people that are coming to the table, you have just a better table. Really, just have a better table.
Yeah, so going back to the economic aspect of all this, right? You know, you mentioned 2043 vision, you know, being your brand, and which is really dope. How do we build an inclusive economy by 2043?
Yeah, super awesome. So last year we did some research with the University of Chicago, and our goal was to look at successful ecosystems from all over the country. So the Midwest, East Coast, West Coast, and to figure out, or if we could figure out, what are the attributes of successful ecosystem, successful economic and entrepreneurial ecosystem. And what that research revealed, and we looked at Atlanta, we looked at Boston, we looked at Chicago, we looked at Minneapolis, St. Paul, we looked at Seattle, and we looked at Austin. And what the research really showed was that there are three significant factors for economic growth. The first one is institutional factors. So you actually have to have the right institutions. You got to have the universities that are producing top-level talent. You got to have the corporations that have the capital to spend on R&D. You got to have the entrepreneurs that are constantly coming up with new ideas. So you got to have the foundations in the right spaces. So you got to have the institutional factors. We all know that, right? Then you got to have the right environmental factors. So the institutions are one thing, but you also got to have talent.
Right.
You have to have risk capacity. You got to have all these things that are environmental. But the third one was what really, you know, was surprising, because this is how I lived my life, most of my life, actually all of my life. It's who I am as a person, is what the research, what we're calling linkage factors. So these are organizations and companies whose sole purpose and sole role is to connect. So that kind of connection is what actually causes the exponential growth. And so for us, with 2043, we developed a brand, Humans Get Together. Thank y'all so much for coming to the event. Y'all were a sponsor. It was amazing. I brought youth out that were actually building in Web3. You know, they were doing all these different things with blockchain at the event.
Yeah,
so,
we they minted an NFT.
Yeah, they minted
an NFT.
Yeah, they minted an NFT, right?
Yeah.
So shout out for y'all to come. But like, you saw the amazing, and Target was our presenting sponsor, and you saw the ecosystem come together. Folks from different industries, folks from different walks of life coming together in one space. And what folks kept saying was, "Oh, we didn't even know this could happen in Minnesota." Well, when you bring all these people in the same space, innovation can happen. Relationships are built. We've gotten so many really good anecdotes and actual data of people who have already done business with one another. And the interesting thing about it, right, there are people who represent their companies. Let's say, I won't say the name of the company, but let's say they represent a large corporation and they're in the capacity of meeting within that large corporation. Well, they're still themselves. So now they're meeting with the entrepreneur, and now they might do business with that entrepreneur, not in their capacity as a large corporation, but in their capacity as an individual.
Right.
They might have capital to actually invest into that company as a person. So we saw a lot of that happen. So those are kind of the linkage factors that we've built our whole company around. So our brand, Humans Get Together, is just bringing people together. But in May, we're launching, or we have launched, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, Promise Nation, which is really going in much more depth, which is really tracking how we're measuring economic impact, which is connecting the private, public, and philanthropic sectors together and guiding us towards a pathway that will lead to exponential growth, that will lead to folks wanting to actually come to the Twin Cities, coming to Minneapolis, St. Paul, that we're not just known for the place where all these tragedies happen for people who look like me, but a place where innovation continues to grow. So when I think about your question, it's really our best value and my best value as a human is in the linkage factors. And it just so happens that if you have the institutional and environmental factors, folks who are working to continue to link those things together, that's how you scale the economy. And how it relates to Web3 and the metaverse and VR and all those things is what people are doing right now is creating more access for people to come together from all over the world and all over the place. So in many ways, we don't need like a physical space to just for humans to come together. Humans can come together from all over. You can be on the beach. You know, I can be in my office space. The next person could be on a rooftop, and we're all hanging out together in a space. So you might say humans get together in the metaverse sometime in the future, sometime in the near future. So
I would love to do that. Yeah, and no,
so
that's one of the really beautiful things that I experienced at your event was that going back to values and kind of that shared experience. You know, you created a really cool aesthetic experience with a group of people that had a lot of common values and common interests. You know, very forward-thinking group. And that produces a lot of great connections, right? And that's, for me, that's one of the most exciting things about Web3 because we're seeing these communities, self-governing communities too, on a lot of levels, come together around values and aesthetic experience and then produce value out of that, which is kind of counterintuitive for a lot of people in the traditional business world. But I think it's the future. I mean, what do you think about that, and what do you think about kind of how Web3 is driving the future of community building?
So when I was doing my research, so I did a lot of my graduate research at Harvard Innovation Lab and Florida Hospital Innovation Lab on how to scale entrepreneurial ecosystem. I came across this book, very fascinating book that every person who considers themselves a futurist, wants to be a futurist, wants to think about like the world as it is. It's this really dense book, but it's really good. It's called Scale by economist Jeffrey West. And it is such a really good book because literally the thesis of the book is that organizations, cities, governments, microorganisms all function the same at scale. So if you look at the amount of heartbeats that a shrew has in its lifetime as a mammal, a whale whose heart beats significantly slower than that shrew, but if you look at their heart rates, they'll have the same lifespan. So a whale's lifespan is way longer than a shrew, but if you look at the amount of heartbeats, and it's like it scales throughout all mammals. So you can scale that, right? Also, economies, so that's another part of the book. At scale, economies function the same. So all major cities function similarly to how our body functions. Like it takes a life of its own. Mm-hmm. So when you have things like a decentralized autonomous organization, you know, built on blockchain where the organizations are, you know, pretty much the company doesn't need a leader, everyone's contributing to it.
Right.
That's how our world already functions. Like there's a law, like, you know, so when you read Jeffrey West's book from way back, this is before all this stuff about blockchain, like there's a law of scale that everything follows. Organisms, organizations, cities, and large economies. And so if we can pinpoint what those key things are, then we can scale them up or scale them down. And so I think that actually when you look at, you know, how we're creating, you know, the future in terms of tech, it's functioning just how the world functions. I think we just noticed it a little bit more clear because we get to participate. That's the difference. The difference is a lot of us don't get to participate in the fundamentals of our economy, right? Like I'm not going to say we're a cog, but everyone has their individual job or their own individual company, but really we're not affecting the interest rate. We're not affecting the pillars of society that everyone is governed by. But in this iteration of the world, we get to participate in what that might look like. So imagine, you know, depending on whatever the exchange is within that space, we all get to decide, okay, what's going to be the interest rate. Like, how crazy is that?
In like your specific,
your specific area, your specific
your
community,
and your
you get to decide that, which is
100%.
Like, you know, which is, you know, you're getting to set what your currency can be. That's a tremendous amount of power, especially so now as it relates back to equity. As a group who historically has been under-resourced or who historically has been left out in power and powerful conversations, the opportunity to engage and be a part of that, Like, whoa, like that's life changing. I'll say something that, hopefully it's not controversial. I used to be the vice president for the Minneapolis NAACP, so I've spent a lot of time in community organizing as well as the activism space. And this technology can do what we have been fighting for 30, 40 years to do without anyone being traumatized or brutalized. Think about that. Like, the power that we're trying to, really when folks say Black Lives Matter, right, in terms of that there's a value to that matter. That matter isn't just a word. Like, we're saying there's an equation, there's an aspect of that, right? And now we're creating a world where you actually matter. Not that you can matter, but that you do. And so
it's quantified.
Exactly, and to not expose as many people to that as possible, I think that's that's wrong. And I don't want to be wrong. I want to try to be right as possible.
I would agree, and I feel I definitely feel that sense of responsibility. I feel like you probably do too, as someone who is looking into the future, looking at this technology, to be like, yeah, we got to talk about this, right? Like, people need to know about what's going on, because this is potentially a huge paradigm shift, like you're saying, but in really almost every area of life.
Yeah.
To tie a few things together here, you mentioned at the beginning of the episode that you've always kind of been, looking to the future, and you mentioned, kind of an allusion to a gift of prophecy, or more of a spiritual understanding of that. And I know that you're a spiritual person. Tell me, how does your relationship with God, or how does spirituality fit into your life and into what you're doing, purpose-wise in the business world?
Man, it's crazy. I was having this conversation with my partner yesterday. I left, I originally went to school for theology, and freshman year, I was in there and I was like, this is it for me, right? And changed over to business and industrial psychology. She was like, man, everything you do, it just seems like it goes back to faith. Mm-hmm. And I really think that it does. And I think we're living in a world where, it doesn't necessarily matter what religion someone belongs to, but I think this idea of a unified spirituality is taking root. It's like a renaissance or a rebirth of spirituality, and an interest in understanding that there's something that is beyond this that we can't understand. For me, that's God. For someone else, they might consider it something different, or they might not even know what it is. But, what I found growing up in the church was, I was always very scientific about my beliefs and what I understand. And I would read these things that were, religious, but it would really resonate with me through technology. Mm. So I'll give you a really quick example, and hopefully this doesn't take things, off the rails. I'm a Christian, Seventh-day Adventist, grew up that way. And in my religion, there's a belief that when you die, you're actually asleep, and that God is going to come back and raise you from the dead. But you're going to get a new body. So the kind of bodies that we have now, we'll have like a new body. So for me, it's like the concept that's like, people are like, oh, what's that? When I was growing up, I always thought about it like hardware and software, right? And when this thing that, your spirit is the same, but you'll get a new body, that kind of whole concept. So when I think about it, it's like, imagine, having the old iMac, and you're trying to run today's version of today's software on it. It wouldn't work, right? So you need new hardware for it to process as fast as it can. Mm. So I always thought about it like our bodies as hardware and our spirit as a sense of software. So if you take your computer and you put it on a hard drive, the essence of that, you can take the essence of everything that's on that computer and move it onto another computer and another computer. Yeah. And it could be a faster, all those things, right? So I always thought like that. I was like, oh, this is a really simple concept, and I always thought of God as this master technologist and this master architect. And so as it relates to my spirituality in the world, I see all these connections and I see all these dots where folks see difference, I see commonality. When I was a kid, I grew up in some of the most under-resourced neighborhoods. So if I focused on my present, I would always look at what I don't have and the opportunities that I can't get. But if I could focus on my mind on the future, then I could always be pointing towards something that I'm always chasing. And what kept happening was, what I would chase, I would actually get. And so for me, focusing on the future transcended me from the past, from the present that I was actually living in, which, for us wasn't necessarily the best. And so when I think about my spirituality, that's like an essence of who I am. And we're living in, so I'm grateful about the time that we're living in, where spirituality isn't this taboo kind of thing, right? It's an aspect of who we are. And that's why, like, with you being a yoga instructor, we're just talking about hot yoga, like offset, right? And how that can transform us. And, you know, we've seen how yoga helps transform our bodies and heals and all these other things. That's spirituality. Like, but that's all around us. And so how do we collectively see our humanity in a way that helps us to push from where we are to the ideals that we hold most? And I think by 2043 we get there. And I'm working hard to get there.
And that's really, I mean, you pretty much summed up the reason, you know, why I started creating and speaking and this podcast, right? Is this concept for me? I call it ascendance, right? Which is, you know, how do we push the limits of our innate potential? And I think it's beautiful the way that you conceptualize kind of technology and God and the body, and you know, yoga is really about like connecting the spirit and the body too. It's that link, getting outside of the mind, and yeah, I mean, we're living in a time where we can speak about a lot of this, where in the past, you know, even just saying certain words would trigger people to the point where they couldn't even have the conversation. But I think if we don't have that conversation, we don't bring spirit or God or whatever that you want to conceptualize it as into the conversation, I think we lose out on part of our humanity that, you know, we just really can't do without.
Wow, that's so powerful, Will. When you think about so many cultures living across the world, they all have a certain religious aspect of their life. And even if they don't believe in a higher power, they're going to believe in something. Like, they believe in something that's bigger than themselves. Like, even if you believe in climate change, which is a fact, but if you believe that's a reality, like, although right now we're pretty cool, right? But if you think in the next 25 years, if we don't make a change, like, our whole world is going to be submerged, like, that belief will push you to work against folks who are skeptics and don't believe in it at all and think, you know, this is not what we're seeing. And so it's like this idea, I think it's innately human to believe. So if it's innately human to believe, let's not judge each other about necessarily what we believe, but the foundation that we actually believe in something. And I think that in many ways, you know, I don't want to use this word spiritual, but Web3 feels spiritual.
It does.
Doesn't it feel like a little spirit? Like, it's like, it feels spiritual, doesn't it? Like,
well, it's almost, you know, the way that the communities are developing is almost like I don't want to say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Connotation, right? That's why I was saying. Yeah, no, but for sure. It's like people have their own, and then you also have the Web3 deniers and people who are like, NFTs are evil and all those things. It's like, well, it's pyramid schemes, there's all these things that are happening there. So it's like, it's so interesting that the next iteration of humanity is just like the old iteration, but we can do way more. So
Well, I know we're almost at time here, so really, you know, appreciate all these thoughts and always appreciate these conversations. Last thing, to go back to one point that you made, which was that envisioning the future helped you transcend your present reality, right? I think that's one of the most important things for me and for any leader, I think, right now who's in the space of emerging technology, Web3, is to understand that literally the visions that we're casting right now are what is going to be created, right? And so for you, you're here in MSP, right? 2043, that's the goal, that's the vision. What is that vision for you, you know, summed up in 30 seconds? What is this city, this place, MSP, what is that for you in 2043?
Yeah, so MSP looks like a place where we have a really healthy relationship with risk. It looks like a place where there is so much diversity that the conversation around diversity is almost non-existent. It looks like a place where we're not thinking about just one place as to where those particular folks occupy, but people who look different occupy a wide spread of areas. It looks like a city and both city governments or the surrounding city governments that are working together with entrepreneurs and the corporate space to continue a cyclical economy. It looks like where a child doesn't have to spend their entire life savings or the life savings that they don't have or go into crazy amounts of debt in order to get a job. but they might be trained on that because of the ability of their capacity to learn. So when I think about 2043, I think about what the original writers of the Constitution wanted America to be, even though that it wasn't. I think that it looks like a place where every child that's born is made to feel that they are equal, and where for everyone who would like to pursue happiness, they have a realistic shot at doing that. And that's our vision for 2043, which I think is almost everyone else's vision.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Will.
It's on.